Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Heather Isvaran, and with me today is Mourad Mourad, Sergeant with the NYPD. Welcome, Mourad.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Heather.
Sure. So first, tell us a little bit about your career and what your current assignment is in the department.
So my career started off in the criminal field in the NYPD, and then it shifted over towards working in the Intelligence Bureau on terrorism investigations.
And your thesis is very interesting because you're talking about de-radicalization for the whole of law enforcement. So I wonder if you could tell me how you identified that problem.
So when coming into it, I wanted to do something about gathering intelligence. And I spoke to Chris Bellavita, and he stated, you already know how to do this so well, what are you going to learn from doing such research? So then I started looking at the opposite end of it, of how could we prevent this problem from a law enforcement perspective.
And what exactly is the problem statement?
So the problem statement right now is that we've seen the increase in homegrown violent extremism, whether it's a jihadist, white supremacist, school shooters, and there currently isn't a way that we deal with that issue on a front level before the individual's radicalization materializes to carrying out an act of violence. So what I would like to research and like to see what the thesis could discover is, one, how could we get involved in the early stage and prevent an individual from going down a path of violent extremism? And number two, how could law enforcement re-engage individuals that they once investigated, such as Omar Mateen, Elton Simpson, Nicholas Cruz, and re-engage that individual on a non-criminal space, providing alternative methods to disengage them from a radical ideology.
And what would those alternative methods entail?
So what I'm starting to see now is a lot of multi-disciplinary teams and the public health approach. Looking at the schools of thought, why do these individuals radicalize? Are they suffering from grievances? Are they suffering from ideological approach? Is it a network? Is it some sort of mental illness which have seen rise and become this huge issue across the country in recent times? How do we go about providing those individuals with the help they need, as long as it's not in the criminal space? Mm-hmm. So providing family members and those who are close to the individual with maybe a helpline to call up and say, hey, we need your help. My son suffers from such a mental illness, or he's being bullied in school. He needs a mentor, somebody who's going to help him throughout his life. Mm-hmm. Because I observed him going on a website that might guide him towards a path of violent extremism, and I'm looking to prevent that. So we haven't seen the country shift over to that. We've seen it in other European countries, but in the US, we haven't implemented that. And those are the other approaches that we could support somebody without criminal investigations.
And I think, you see the narrative that the news media has, and it's pretty anti-law enforcement much of the time. So how do you engage trust with the community? Is that a part of the research?
I mean, that's a very, very important point. So we've seen the anti-law enforcement rhetoric, but we also seen the media come back and kind of support those agencies who have built grassroots relationships with the community, with neighborhood policing, for example, in the NYPD. It's been responsible for the precipitous crime drops across the city, in which we're able to really have one-on-one relationships with law enforcement officers, and members of the community could sit there, talk, one human to another human, and you build relationships. And with those relationships comes trust. Many other law enforcement agencies are developing such neighborhood policing type of programs. And we could use those relationships, that trust build about the law enforcement image, to leverage and cooperation with the community. At the end of the day, this isn't about a race, a religion, creed. It's about safety of the communities. How could law enforcement be more involved so our kids go to school safe, then come back home safe? So that way our children aren't steered down a path of radicalization. Our friends, our family members. At the end of the day, it's about the community. How can we maximize our reach into communities, all different communities? Every community has issues, problems. We are human, we are fallible, right? Mm-hmm. And those times, they don't require conducting an arrest. It could be a mentor. It could be a meeting with a police officer. It could be meetings with boxers. There are many sports programs. And we could leverage those relationships to build the close relationship, in which develops trust, in which a parent, a friend could reach out to law enforcement and say, hey, I need your help. I know you won't prosecute my child. You're going to give him the help he needs.
Well, I think that's probably the key, is to get that message out. So you mentioned the helpline, which is great for families to have something. Are there any other tools that might be available?
Well, there are many other tools to develop community relations, right? And the NYPD has Community Affairs Department, in which they go out and develop relationships with every single community in New York City. The thesis, however, focused on identifying those at-risk individuals and disengaging them from a violent extremism. So it will be out of the scope of the thesis to talk about community relations. The scope of the thesis will be how to disengage individuals from going down a violent path of extremism.
And so you're relying on the families to help identify that. Are there other ways for identification?
So, yeah, you have families, you have relatives, you have educators, you have friends, sports coaches. You know, it could be a neighbor, anybody who's close embedded with that individual who realizes something alarming, and that alarming is not criminal. It's just something is wrong here, and we're trying to identify it. It doesn't mean the person's a criminal. It just means that early stage, and it could be a fake signal. It could be at times not a reliable lead, right? Which is fine, because there's nothing to. We're not prosecuting anybody, and we're trying to really help communities at large. This is hopefully a model to be implemented across many different law enforcement agencies, to say, hey, we realize we have issues here that affect the security of our nation and the safety of our communities, and we want to address those issues on the front end instead of waiting to find out what has happened.
Well, you see it on the news all the time, where, you know, the neighbor is saying, you know, I noticed something weird. I never said anything. I didn't want to, you know, ruffle any feathers. I didn't want anybody to get in trouble, because I didn't really know if it was bad or good. You know?
It's not just it's neighbors, the teachers, friends, relatives. Everybody's coming out and said, well, I was scared. I didn't want him to get arrested. Well, how do you eliminate that line of I was scared, I didn't want him to get arrested, to making it shift over to I was happy I called and he was able to get the help he deserved. And that's what I aim to do with the thesis, aim to discover.
Is public health a part of that formulation in the thesis?
Public health is a huge part of the thesis, of how to bring different disciplinary interagency cooperation in order to help individuals at risk of going down a path of violent extremism.
So what could they possibly help with?
Well, in many ways, it could provide social services, mental illness, psychologists, mentors. Public health looks at treating an individual like a doctor would diagnose a disease. Well, you need this medication, this might help you. Depending on each person, there's no linear path to radicalization. There's no linear treatment. So therefore, every person might be different. Somebody might need a mentor, somebody might need a mental health professional, somebody might need a friend to talk to, or they might need a religious scholar. Every person is different. There's not a set pattern to the path of violent extremism. So therefore, that's why it's a targeted intervention method, meaning that we are law enforcement, we are the doctors, we are here to see the patient and diagnose how could we help this one individual to disengage from violent extremism.
Well, it certainly is timely research, and we're really looking forward to seeing how it comes to fruition. And a national model would be great. So thank you so much for your time and your research.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I really appreciate it.